Hello YouTube, my name's Joe Lyman and I'm going to talk to you about tires and how they relate in Forza Horizon 5. So, the tires are the primary mode of interaction that any vehicle has with the environment around it. You can also argue that drag and downforce would be the other major factors, but they don't play nearly as much of an influence as the tire does. In engineering school, if you are first year, you learn about a specific formula. The force friction is equal to the coefficient of friction times a downward force, where if you have a downward force, the coefficient of friction tells you how much frictional force that you're capable of. What's interesting to note about that formula is it's independent of area. So you could have all of that force in that formula on the head of a pin, or you could have it spread out on a large sheet across the ground, and as long as it's the same force and the same coefficient of friction, according to that formula, it would be the same amount of friction. The problem with that formula, though, is, and especially when it comes to tires, is tires are not static, they're dynamic, and as the bottom surface makes contact with the ground, it dynamically stretches and moves at a different rate than the actual ground itself, and that in turn means that it's not a simple linear ratio like that. What ends up happening in the case of car tires, to kind of describe it at a high level, is the more pressure there is, the less efficient it becomes. So if the coefficient of friction is, let's say, 1, where 1 pound down yields 1 pound of force at a very light pressure rate, when you apply more pressure, let's say 2 pounds per unit of area, the amount of, or per the same unit of area, I should say, the amount of force is not 2 pounds horizontally, it'd be slightly less, say 0.9 or whatever it ends up being. Because of that, and because it doesn't follow that formula, we end up with a situation where vehicles that have thicker, wider tires have less force applied to that contact area, because that contact area is spread out, and that means the amount of traction that they're capable of is increased. Hence why if you upgrade a vehicle in Forza Horizon 5 and you increase the size of the tires, you're increasing that contact area, and that does mean that your car will be capable of more cornering or accelerating or braking force, but the increased surface area does have somewhat of a drawback in that it increases the rolling resistance as well and can detrimentally impact your top speed. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk more about what you can actually see in the game in terms of tires and what kind of information you can pull from it, especially from the telemetry mode. With tires, when you start out in any vehicle before driving anywhere, the tire will be at room temperature. In telemetry, I can actually see the temperature of the tires. Right now, my car in game, you can see all of the temperatures are live and they're changing. This output shows you the inside, middle, and outside for each tire. And right now they're hovering around 95, 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Slowly dropping, probably because the sun's going down and nighttime is coming out. That's actually pretty darn cool. Now, if I start driving, you can see those temperatures, especially if I start doing a burnout, those temperatures heat way up. And what's interesting though is the hotter the tire gets up to a certain point, the greater the coefficient of friction, or the more force it can put out. So practically what that means is, let's say you're doing a rivals race, and you do your first lap, and then you come in for your second lap where you're hot and you're full tilt through, and you do an absolutely perfect lap as fast as you possibly, let's say you're a computer algorithm and you are optimizing it down to the last hundredth of a microsecond. That second lap will be pretty good, but the third lap, no matter how good of a computer it is, will be even better, because after that third lap, those tires would have heated up even more and will have increased the coefficient of friction, making the car capable of higher accelerations, which is cool and good to know, because if you're doing rivals, you don't want to immediately quit the rivals event if you messed up part of a lap. You want to keep going and keep your tires warm, so you don't have to go through that whole transitory period where you have cold tires that don't have as much friction as they could have had. Now, why does this game have temperatures on the inside, middle, and outside? If you watched my previous video explaining camber, that's exactly why. It tells you how the wheel is riding on the road. If the wheel is perfectly level and flat, you'll see those three temperatures roughly equal to each other. If you have negative camber, where the top of the tire points inwards toward the center of the car, you'll see what you have here, where the inner temperatures are warmer than the outer temperatures. Having negative camber is a generally good thing, because when you go into a corner, the car rolls over, and if I go over here, we can see forces on the tires. When you go into a corner, one side of the car gets more force than the other, and if your car is rolling, you want the side with more force to be flat, or as close to flat as possible. Hence why having a little negative camber is good. So that's good and dandy. I'm showing you how to view those temperatures. Sorry, a little brain fart there. Next, let's talk a bit about, not really something to Forza, but something with cars in general. You might be aware of nitrogen filling for tires versus air filling. The reason why people do nitrogen filling is because compared to air, when it heats up, it doesn't expand and change the pressure in your tire. When your tire has a lower pressure, it increases the contact surface on the bottom, which potentially means more force, but it also causes the less force on the middle and more force on the outside, which for a passenger car means increased wear on the outside of the tire. And inversely, if it heats up and expands and you have too much pressure into your tire, you get excessive wear in the middle, as it instead inflates out and pushes harder in the middle than it does on the outside. In terms of performance, if you have flatter tires, generally speaking, the flatter tire is the more it can handle changes in road geometry. For example, if I go off-road, the tire itself deforms to the bumps and can maintain traction better. Whereas if you have a nice hard tire, you'll end up having your tire lift off of the contact surface for a greater amount of time, and thus lose out on how much tractive force that it has overall. Harder tires also benefit or they do have some benefit though, because one, they increase the top speed of the vehicle by reducing the rolling resistance. The rolling resistance is decreased because the bottom contact patch is smaller because the tire deforms less. Additionally, by having harder tires, it increases the rate at which weight is transferred when you go into corners. So if I go to this one here, you can see how quickly each of those circles grow and shrink. Actually, I wonder, I think I can go accessibility. Check this out, offline game speed. We're gonna crank it way down, 40%. Let's try that. So now the car is driving as if you're in slow motion. So you can see the bumping and changing in real time, or closer. It's less extreme and fast. Essentially, what happens when you have harder tires, the rate at which that circle weight transfers from the outside, one side to the other, increases, and it can mean that your car is more responsive. It can also mean that your car will break free quicker too if you go hard into a corner. And depending on front versus rear, where if your front is harder and transfers weight faster than the rear, then if you go into a corner, generally speaking, the front end of the car is going to break out first before the back end does, and then you're going to lose front traction and plow into the corner and understeer. And reverse, if the back end is transfers that weight faster, then your back end will break out first and you'll oversteer. And depending on what you're after, that may be beneficial either way. Finally, when it comes to different surface conditions, you have different tread patterns and stuff, and Forza has a very simplistic model in terms of that, and that model is essentially based on what the surface that you're driving on is, and it changes the coefficient of friction relative to what kind of tire you have. So if you have a racing slick, the coefficient of friction on pavement will be very high, but on dirt it'll be really, really low. And if you have a rally tire, it'll be more in between. And if you have an off-road tire or a mud tire or whatever they call it, it'll have very poor pavement performance, but it'll have high dirt performance, and perhaps more important when it comes to certain races, when you hit water, bodies of water, it'll slow you down a lot if you don't have the right tires on. Depending on how fast you're going, you can lose like instantly within a fraction of a second 100 miles per hour if you try plowing through that water with race slicks on. But with mud tires on, you'll just plow right through almost unfazed. So yeah, that is tires in a nutshell. I'm really, really enjoying this slow motion version of driving. I wonder, how fast am I going? 145 miles per hour, and it feels like I'm going 30. Or I guess when I'm going 200, it'll feel like I'm going 80 miles per hour. That's cool. Anyway, I'm Joe Lyman. If you appreciated this information, you want to know more, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button. Feel free to ask questions below in the comment section. I regularly stream Forza Horizon 5, as well as other non-car related games like Diablo 2 Resurrected or Satisfactory I'm really big into. I'd love to see you stop by any of those live streams and talk to me, ask me questions, just hang out. I'm trying to grow my community, and every person helps. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.
Peace.